The economic crisis in Sri Lanka has led to the citizens of the country to take onto the streets in protest and demand of the resignation of the president. And in the latest development, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has formally resigned, leading the protesters to celebrate his resignation in Colombo.
Sri Lanka is facing the worst economic crisis it has ever faced, due to which millions of Sinhalese citizens poured over to the streets to protest against the government that led to this situation. And now, after months of protests by protesters and growing demand that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa resign, the citizens of Sri Lanka have finally got some reprieve as Gotabaya Rajapaksa has formally resigned from Singapore. Some 6.26 million Sri Lankans, or 3 in 10 households, were unsure of where their next meal is coming from, according to the latest food insecurity assessment from the World Food Programme. In the wake of record food price inflation, skyrocketing fuel costs and widespread commodity shortages, some 61% of households are regularly using coping strategies to cut down on costs, such as reducing the amount they eat and consuming increasingly less nutritious meals. The UN Food Relief Agency anticipates that even more people will turn to these coping strategies as the crisis deepens. All is not well in Sri Lanka, as the country is facing the worst economic crisis in its nation's history. But how did it all start? Critics say the roots of the crisis, the worst in several decades, lie in economic mismanagement by successive governments that created and sustained a twin deficit, a budget shortfall alongside a current account deficit. Sri Lanka is a classic twin deficits economy, said a 2019 Asian Development Bank working paper. Twin deficits signal that a country's national expenditure exceeds its national income and that its production of tradable goods and services is inadequate. But the current crisis was accelerated by deep tax cuts promised by Rajapaksa during a 2019 election campaign that were enacted months before the COVID-19 pandemic, which wiped out parts of Sri Lanka's economy. With the country's lucrative tourism industry and foreign workers' remittances sapped by the pandemic, credit ratings agencies moved to downgrade Sri Lanka and effectively locked it out of international capital markets. The Rajapaksa government's decision to ban all chemical fertilizers in 2021, a move that was later reversed, also hit the country's farm sector and triggered a drop in the critical rice crop. This led to the irate protesters to take to the streets to protest against the government and demand resignation of the president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. As the situation got dire, Rajapaksa fled the country amid the worst economic crisis. Rajapaksa fled the island nation and landed in the Maldives on July 13th, the day he was supposed to resign from his post. His escape to Maldives was negotiated by former Maldives President Mohammad Nasheed, sources said. Before fleeing the nation, President Rajapaksa issued an extraordinary gazette appointing PM Ranil Wickremesinghe to exercise, perform and discharge the powers and duties of the office of President during the period of his absence. Amid mayhem and chaos in Sri Lanka, acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe instructed armed forces and police to bring the current situation under control. And after months of protests and turmoil, Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa emailed a letter of his resignation to the Parliament Speaker late on Thursday, a source familiar with the matter told news agency Reuters. It was not immediately clear if the letter sent shortly after Rajapaksa arrived in Singapore would be accepted in email form, the source added. Rajapaksa landed in Singapore on Thursday after fleeing mass protests over his country's economic meltdown as troops patrolled the commercial capital Colombo to enforce a curfew. Rajapaksa, who fled to the Maldives on Wednesday to escape a popular uprising over his family's role in a crippling economic crisis, headed on to Singapore on a Saudi Arabian airline flight, according to a person familiar with the situation. After the resignation, people were seen celebrating Rajapaksa's resignation at Galiface Park in Colombo. Now in the reshuffle, Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was sworn in as the interim president of the island nation on Friday. Prime Minister Wickremesinghe was sworn in before Chief Justice Jayanta Jayasuriya. Earlier in the day, Sri Lankan Speaker Mahinda Yapa Abhivardhana officially announced the resignation of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The speaker said that as one of the oldest democracies in South Asia, he urged all the political parties and the people to assist to follow the democratic practices and take necessary steps to resolve the current situation. The parliament would be summoned on Saturday, July 16th to take nominations for the next president and then to have an election among 225 MPs.
That's all we have for now. Keep watching Hornbill TV.